These are my son's first Age of Sigmar Stormcast. I didn't really show him any major painting tips. He asked for paints, I provided, and then rescued the brushes when he was done. I think he did great. It's important to paint for the sake of painting and not necessarily for the outcome. But after I painted a bunch of Skaven rats out of the same Age of Sigmar starter box, well, my son kind of stopped painting. We've all had this, I think, on different levels, a little put down by others' results. So I showed him a new technique. It's some pretty good-looking golden boys and girls. See, I tried to figure out a workflow that could elevate certain styles of beginner miniature painting, but also be a tool for a swift army paint job. Something that would sidestep the need for tons of experience, a steady and precise hand, and maybe even time, yet still render results that look nice on the table. For beginners, and especially young beginners, brush control is the first major hurdle. So what if we remove the brush? Second hurdle, not only for beginners, but all of us, is getting painterly results. You know, shadows and highlights. A miniature that not just looks like it has paint on, but looks like it exists in a miniature world. Is there a tool that could help? This is the makeup sponge. Here's a quick run-through of the basic technique. Dip the sponge in water and get it all wet. Press out as much water as you can. Then place the sponge in some kitchen towel-style paper and squeeze. Continue to try and get as much water out as possible. The goal is a damp sponge and not a wet sponge. When satisfied, dip the tip of the sponge in paint and then dunk it on the moist paper to reduce the amount of paint in the sponge. It should be damp with paint, not wet with paint. Then lightly stipple the sponge against your miniature, round and round, not stopping in one spot for too long. Let's see how this works out on a Stormcast. I've got a black primed miniature. The black will be my deepest shadows, as well as a good colour for all the unimportant bits like armpits and perineums. But it's too dark as a base for most of the gold, so the first step is a brown. I chose a brown that looks like gold in shadow, a slight green tint, like something you'd see on a Second World War US soldier. I dilute the paint with a bit of water. This totally depends on what brand of paint you are using. Paints are a bit like trolls. Some are thicker than others. The moist sponge goes into the paint, and then I remove the worst excess by pressing it down on a bit of kitchen paper towel. And then start stippling on the paint. I go for the hardest to reach areas first, really trying to get the sponge in everywhere it fits, getting as much of this brown on as possible. It's best to stipple on a bit of paint and then move it onto a new area. The paint wants a little time to dry before being stippled again, and if stippled while drying, the paint can come off onto the sponge. But we're talking very short periods of time, so I just work round and round. Simple, really. Now, if we have a look at this, we've got a nice smooth layer of paint. There's plenty of places where the sponge can't reach the black, and this is a good thing. The black in the crevices and the sort of gradients that happen where it's difficult to reach with the sponge creates depth and character. Something that would take quite a bit of concentration to do with a brush, but the sponge kind of does it automatically. We can now move on to the gold. I don't dilute the gold. Metallic paints tend to not like water much. And it's the same process again, only I try to not overly reach the hard-to-reach places. This is more of a casual stipple, stipple, stipple. It takes a few passes. If you're an adept painter, it's definitely possible to build up more bright gold where you want and leave less in the shaded areas. But I'm going for the same style of application as my son. Stipple, stipple, stipple. Now this is great. Nice and smooth, a slight texture, gold with a soul. Where the sponge does not reach well, we have the brown and then the black, creating realistic, in a miniature world, shading. A kind of weathered, vintage look. To me, everything you need in your golden fantasy warrior boy with big freaking wings. And I was kind of tempted to stop here. I really like this look, but my son is, like some dwarf down the wrong shaft, very much entranced by the possibility of that warm gold tone. You know, like on the box art. A layer of warm Caucasian skin tone wash will do the trick. I mean, it does add more than just warmth. It also adds another layer of painterly looks. So I think my son was onto something. The green shade gets neutralized a bit, but there's still enough of it in places to get an interesting look. And as a final touch, I did a very gentle dry brush with a brighter gold. Well, I didn't actually have a brighter gold, so I mixed a silverish metallic into the gold. Dry brushing over the surface with very little paint in the brush and just barely touching the raised areas. This kind of stuff is really something you can help a beginner with. Show how little paint there needs to be in the brush, how to wipe it off on a paper towel, maybe give a tip on to test on a not so visible area of the model first to see just how things work out. And the gold is done. It's pretty good, right? Moving forward is all about deciding how to keep things simple and interesting for the painter. I immediately ruled out painting pauldrons or pants, for example. It's a golden warrior, let it be golden. The shield, however, needs colour, and obviously, the wings. There's now an obvious dread of ruining the gold since it looks so nice, and so here's a tip, another great tip for beginners. Masking. Using some blue tack, well, it's grey, like a weathered zombie, rather than blue. Let's call it tack. By covering the gold with this, I eliminate the risk of accidentally creating, an all-blue shield. But here my workflow and the one I helped my son with differ slightly. We both stippled on a dark blue first. It doesn't quite reach the inner edges of the shield, so a nice thick black wash after the initial blue does the trick of darkening those areas. In my case, I removed the tack before the wash. In my son's case, I left it on. Removing the tack will produce, a neater result, but means I have to reapply it again when I go back in to stipple on brighter and brighter blue paint. Obviously, if you're adept with a brush, that first layer of blue could be painted on with a brush, and then add the wash. Then add the tack to protect the gold when you stipple on the brighter blues. Just like I did here on the wings. Masking this with blue tack would take way too long, and just doing it with a brush and some focused painting is swifter. And when I then did add the blue tack, no finesse is needed. I made sure I covered the gold, but it also covers some blue. It doesn't matter. Brighter blue can then be sponged on. I'm going very bright here, going to almost white, adding each consecutive layer of brighter blue further and further out towards the tip of the wings. When in the hands of a young beginner, it can be suitable to place the Mini on the desk while doing this rather than holding it in your hand. It's a lot easier to aim the sponge on something lying flat on the desk than when holding it and, could save it from breaking apart. And now we have some pretty great wings that are high visual stimuli on the gaming table. If you do get a little residue pieces of tack on the Mini, it's easy to clean up by pressing a blob of the tack onto the residue tack stuck to the Mini. The tack will rather attach itself to its big tack friend than the intimidating golden man. And now, most of the Mini is done. There's details left, and again, how much you want to dabble at things is a variable. There are a few tricks that can make life a little more forgiving, however. For instance, I chose a rather muted magenta type color for the shafts of the weaponry. It looks nice, but it also looks a little like blood. So if accidentally smudged, like we can see on my son's Stormcast here, and I quote my son, "Oh, cool, it looks like blood." So what was in the perfect world mistakes is now cool blood splatter. You can, of course, also help out. The leather straps were just a little too finicky for my son, so I painted all of them on his models. Then, of course, washes. Washes are easy to apply and make things look good. If smeared in the wrong place, they don't really make much of a visible impact. Washes are also a great place to start coming to terms with the fact that you can sort of push paint around, push it in towards places where you want it to pull up. Great brush control practice. And there's obviously more ways to mask than using tack. Delicate indoor painter's tape is one, but if you're a bit light on the hands, so are post-it notes. I cut off the strip of the post-it note that has glue on and use that for masking things that have relatively straight lines, just as a form of protection for what lies underneath. By masking this collection of dry cleaners receipts, for example, there's no worry about getting paint on anything but where it is supposed to go. Once you have a steady hand, this is maybe not something you need, but before you get there, this is a great way to just keep accidents and potential outbursts of anger at bay. Now, regarding highlights, again, this is up to the prolific nature of the painter, but if you're up for trying, maybe look around for what seems like a good place to start. These shafts, for example, are a nightmare to highlight. I've painted several Stormcast armies, and I still hate these darn shafts. The paper collection, on the other hand, has a more forgiving shape. It's just straight lines and a few straight edges that can be painted over with brighter paints. Satisfactory, and again, a good place to start learning. You know, you don't have to do them all, you can just do the ones you're comfortable with. Now, I kind of really want to push how pretty much anyone starting out can, together with a bit of guidance, get satisfying results with the sponge thing. Not only on a Stormcast type miniature, but also on wargaming terrain and such. I'm now totally into wild and blind sponging and paint application on these ruined base bits. First a darker grey, one rather sloppy, almost covering layer. Then a bit of bright sort of mossy green, again, just slapping it on there. This could be done a bit more manageably with a flat brush, by the way. Flat brushes tend to be more manageable for young painters, maybe because that's often what was shoved in their hands in, like, kindergarten and school. Anyway, then a good old thick slap on of a black wash. You go nuts, you know. And we now have a perfect base for some sponging, kind of like the wings. Brighter and brighter grey paints, or just use the one grey and add more white to it as you stipple sponge on the paint. And in a matter of moments, a pretty picture-perfect ruined stone thing. The last shards of some former civilization smashed by the might of military power. Some things never change. Now, if you just translate this to wargaming terrain, and, well, there's great potential. On bigger pieces, however, make sure to protect your furniture and innocent pets if you've got enough tack and post-it notes, that is. And the almighty Golden Warrior is done. Imagine an army of these. A pretty sight that would be. I've taken a lot of shortcuts adjusting the paint job after my son's patience, pretty much. Not only adults want their armies on the table fast. And you know, you kind of want to see that you're getting somewhere fast when you're starting out. And I hope this has been one of the ways of doing that. Oh, and here's a shot of most of the paints I used for this paint job. But there is no need for specifics. Use what is available to you. You know, it's the technique that matters. Mine are just the paints I had within reaching distance when at home painting with my son. Please, if you wish, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video. I've also got a Patreon if you'd like to support my work making these YouTube videos. The Patreon is totally transparent, so you can see how much I make and decide for yourself if you consider that a decent monthly income. Now back to painting the next mini. See you soon again, I hope. Bye.